Chapter 10. After lunch and her talk with Steve, JV still couldn't settle her mind. She gave up on getting any work done after only 30 minutes. She closed her laptop and set it aside, before starting to pace her room. Soon, a soft knock interrupted her. "Come on in," she called, never slowing in her relentless walk back and forth. The door opened and Rebecca stood in the opening. "You sound a little restless, dear. Is there any way I can help?" JV gave her a wry smile. "I don't think so. I'm fine, really. I just can't settle my mind enough to work." "How about a walk?" she suggested. JV was quiet, thinking about it. "That sounds like heaven. Why don't you go down the road past the house? Just a little ways past Steve's place you'll find the barn and corrals. I don't know if you'll run into Steve back there." Rebecca gave JV a knowing grin. "But if not, you'll still get some fresh air and you'll feel better." JV nodded and quickly pulled on her shoes, grabbed a jacket to ward off the chilly wind she heard blowing, then set out. She wasn't sure she wanted to see Steve again. Not now. If the little bit of time she'd spent with him at lunch had stirred her this much, seeing him again certainly wouldn't settle her. Not in a hurry, she walked at a steady, comfortable pace, and in just a few minutes, she found another break in the trees. From the buildings and things scattered through the clearing, she now saw how this could be a working ranch. She glanced around, wondering where she should go next. There was a man inside a corral with a horse. She headed in his direction. Moving slowly, because she didn't know how well trained the horse was and she didn't want to startle him, she leaned against the rails of the corral and watched the old man work. Even over the acrid odor of horse manure and the sun-kissed scent of hay, she could tell the man was a shifter. He looked a little old to her to be an enforcer, but that didn't mean he wasn't one. She guessed he was somewhere in his mid-60s. His mustache looked like something out of an old Western movie, except it hadn't been trimmed in a while. He reminded her of a cartoon walrus she used to watch when she was a kid. She couldn't tell much about his hair because he wore an old gray cowboy hat that had seen a lot of better days, but it got the job done. "Is there something I can do for you, little lady?" He kept his voice soft. She assumed it was so he didn't spook the horse. "No." Rebecca suggested a walk. "I saw you working and I was intrigued. I'd like to watch, if you don't mind." She kept her own voice soft in reply. "As long as you don't make any loud noises or sudden moves, I've got no problem." She watched as he brushed the horse, talking to him and telling him what was going on around him. JV got the feeling it was more about the man's tone and the sound of his voice than what he had to say when, in the same tone he'd used with the horse, he asked her name. "I'm JV. You?" Frank Willis?" "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Willis." "None of that Mr. stuff, just call me Frank, everyone does." "What brings you to our neck of the woods, JV?" "I came to see someone, and Rebecca insisted I stay here instead of in town." She shrugged very slightly so she didn't spook the horse. "So here I am." "Let me guess. You came to see our bull-headed foreman." "How did you know?" JV frowned, confused. "You carry his scent, you've been near him recently." "Yeah, it was him I came to see." She looked away, staring sightless across the meadow for a moment. "You gonna to be around a while?" "For a while, I like it here." She glanced around. "It's a lot different than where I'm from." "Where you from?" he asked. "East Texas." She was quiet a moment. "Don't get me wrong, it's pretty there and I love my home, but it's beautiful here. I's born and raised on this mountain. I've traveled a little, but I keep coming back. I 'spect I'll die here." The old man was still talking in the same gentle tone he'd used all along. JV looked around, taking in the view. "I can't say as I blame you, it's nice here. But I'm sure you have a good long time before you need to worry about dying." "It's nice to think so, but things happen to people all the time on a ranch. Horses, even the most well-trained animals, are unpredictable creatures, and accidents happen. A man can be hale, hearty and healthy one day and gone the next. He continued to run the brush over the horse's side, as if he wasn't talking about dying. JV watched the skin twitch and shudder after each stroke. He finished brushing down one side and went back to the horse's head, ducked under the lead rope tethering the animal to the fence to the side JV stood on, then began below the horse's head and brushed. She now saw the ponytail that hung from under the hat and reached halfway down his back. For some reason it made her smile. He seems to like it. JV continued watching. She's learning to. She's not really used to people yet, but brushing and talking to her help. She's getting used to being touched and the sound of my voice. Frank said. JV had assumed the horse was male, that it was female through her. Yep, she's a mare. I take it you've never spent much time around horses? No. There were a few around Tenaha, but none of my family or friends had any. That's too bad, there's a lot to be learned from a horse. She watched him work a while longer, listening to the soft, constant chatter he kept with the horse, while she lost herself in thought. Hey Frank, Nick said, stepping up to the rail beside JV, I see you've met our visitor. Nick's voice stayed soft but friendly. I have, we talked for a bit while I worked, but I think she has more on her mind than talking to an old man. Could be Frank, could be. Nick looked at her, as though he wondered what was on her mind. How's it going? He nodded in the direction of the horse. Frank had begun leading in circles around the corral. So far so good, Frank said, she's coming along. That's good to hear. They continued to talk about how much longer they thought it might take to train the mare, before moving on to other things that needed to be done on the ranch. JV watched the older man walk the horse, not really paying attention to what she was seeing. Instead, she was thinking about how similar what Frank was doing with the mare was to how JV had been dealing with Steve. Was it really that simple? Was he really as skittish as a green horse, or was she being too careful? How has your afternoon gone, JV? Nick asked. The sound of her name pulled her from her musings. Oh, she snapped back to the present. She quickly glanced around, realizing Frank had left the corral, taking the mare with him. Nick was looking at her, waiting for an answer. Good, she paused, I was having a hard time concentrating. Rebecca suggested I walk some. I think it's helped. Good. It's nearly dinner time, I'm headed up to the house, care to join me? Or do you want to wander around out here for a while longer? I'll walk back with you. I feel like I'm imposing on you and Rebecca. Don't, Nick's tone turned serious. I think Rebecca's missed having other women around. He was quiet for a second. I don't mean that she doesn't have friends, she does, but there's no one close, no one she sees or talks to all the time. I take it you two haven't been together long? She felt like she was prying just by asking. Almost 2 years, but she's not from around here, and we've had some trouble with her family. Having you around, even for the short time you've been with us, has really lifted her spirits. I'm glad. I like her, but letting her do things for me makes me uncomfortable. I keep trying to get her to let me help with the cooking and dishes, but she keeps forgetting. She made air quotes with her fingers as she said the last word. A small smile formed on Nick's mouth. She likes to take care of people. She took over my kitchen from the day she appeared on my doorstep. If it'll make you feel better, keep offering to help, but don't be surprised if she refuses. I'm sure given a little time, you'll settle in fine. You're assuming I'll be around long enough for that. You're welcome to stay as long as you like. I'm sure Rebecca feels the same way. Thank you, sir. JV looked away, trying not to let her uncertainty show. None of that sir crap, call me Nick. He sounded a little annoyed. All right. She looked back, I'm not sure if it's going anywhere, but I'm not ready to give up on him yet. You've only been here a few days. Give him some time, I think he'll come around. She took a deep breath and let it out in a rush. He's stuck on our age difference. If that's the only thing stopping him, things are on your side. Give him a little more time. I'm not giving up, not yet. A couple days later, JV felt like she was retracing her steps as she walked down the road, past Steve's cabin and around the bend that kept the rest of the ranch out of sight from the main house. She didn't have a destination in mind, just getting her body moving as she tried to make her brain work again. She still couldn't focus on her project, and she was supposed to have it done by the end of the week. Reaching the clearing where the ranch building stood, she veered away from them, heading instead for the open space of a nearby pasture. She stopped at the gate that looked like it was simply one of the fencing panels that made up the corral. Looking across the pasture, she didn't see anything and assumed it was empty. She climbed the metal pole gate rather than try to wrestle it open, before setting out across the open field. In the distance, she heard the sound of an engine, the high-pitched buzz of an ATV, but she didn't think much of it. She knew they used four-wheelers on a lot of ranches. The buzzing continued getting louder, but JV barely registered the noise as she continued to think about the project she was working on and made her way across the pasture. She was startled when one of the vehicles zipped past her, whipped into a turn and stopped sideways in front of her, blocking her path. "Fool girl. Get on quick," Frank said from his seat on the machine. Without questioning, JV stepped on the running board and threw one leg over the seat. Her butt had scarcely hit the seat when Frank hit the accelerator, and they shot forward. As he turned the machine again, she saw a large bull, easily a ton of angry flesh, hooves and horns, headed straight for them. She gripped the bars that made up the rack on the rear of the machine, as Frank outran the animal and pulled into an open gate leading to another corral. He moved faster than she thought someone his age could, as he scrambled off the still idling ATV and closed the corral gate, effectively blocking the animal. JV gave the gate a dubious look. She thought the bull could smash through the gate if he wanted, but he seemed content to leave them be now that they were no longer in his territory. "What on earth were you thinking, girl?" Frank demanded now that they were safe. "That bull is the meanest creature on the property, and you just go traipsing across his pasture?" "I didn't see him. I thought the field was empty." "Just so you know, that field is almost never empty. We only move him during breeding season." "I'll remember to avoid it from now on," she said contritely. She climbed off the four-wheeler and watched Frank get back on. He pulled it across to the other gate in the corral. This one opened into the yard. JV opened the gate and let him through. She watched as he parked the machine outside the barn and killed the engine. "What were you doing out there anyway?" he asked. "Walking," JV said. "I was trying to clear my mind. I need to get some work done, but I can't think." Actually, her problem was that she was thinking too much, about the wrong things. Frank shook his head. "You need to be more careful. There are a lot of ways to get hurt around here. Hell, you didn't even look up until I was stopped in front of you. You need to be more aware of what's going on around you." "I heard the engine," she shrugged. "I assumed it was someone working and not something I needed to be worried about." He blinked at her, as if he had no words for a moment. "Be more careful, girl." He turned and headed into the barn, leaving her standing there, confused. Not wanting to cause more trouble, JV headed back for the main house, hoping maybe she could finish the project and get it over with. She wasn't holding her breath.